Hi, everybody. Welcome to our evening webinar about federal and state electric vehicle incentives in Massachusetts. We're going to wait just like 30 more seconds to let people come in before we get started, but thank you for joining us so promptly. I think we can get started. I'll get started. Okay, hi everybody. Sorry for that slight pause. Thank you for joining us for our webinar tonight on electric vehicle incentives. My name is Anna and I'm joined by my colleague Ezra, and we will walk you through federal and state incentives today. And I'll just go ahead and get started. So if you're not familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization. We do work across Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and our mission is all about empowering consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon future. What that means is we run a series of programs and services that help people access clean energy technologies, whether that's solar or wind power or heat pumps or electric cars. And then we also do advocacy work at the state level in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island to push for the kinds of policies we need to make sure that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the rate that we need to. So today we're here to talk about the transportation sector, but if you're interested in the other sectors, we do a lot of work in renewable energy generation and building heating as well. Today we're going to focus specifically on incentives, but before we jump into that, I do want to give a general plug for our Drive Green program. If you have questions about electric vehicles in general, whether that's like what the models are or how they fare in winter or how to charge them, we have a ton of resources on our website where you can get answers to those questions, and then also use our shopping tool to compare different vehicle models and sign up to test drive with a local dealer if we have one that has the car you're interested in, right through our website. So if you've got questions about any of those things, please check out our Drive Green program at greenenergyconsumers.org. Today, we're going to cover a couple things. First, we're going to talk about incentives for vehicles, and specifically today, we're talking about individuals. We'll have a webinar in a couple of weeks about incentives for commercial entities, so today we're just talking about individuals, and Ezra will cover that portion. In the second half, we'll talk about incentives to install charging infrastructure at home, and I'll cover that. And then usually we talk about e-bikes here if we're talking about both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. In Massachusetts, unfortunately, there are no incentives for electric bikes, so that section won't be happening today, but there is good news. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center just released a request for information for a potential future electric bike rebate program. So as we learn more about that, we'll share more, but today we're just going to talk about vehicles and charging. As we go through this, please put your questions in the Q&A that you can see on your sort of Zoom screen. We'll pause in between sections to answer any of those questions, and I'll also answer them in writing as we go. But for now, I will pass this over to my colleague Ezra to talk about the vehicles.
Hi, so I will be covering the first half of this presentation, and Anna, if you want to turn your camera off, perfect. So we'll go over different incentives, both federally and through the state, and we'll start first with the federal program. So the federal clean vehicle tax credit has both two components for new cars and used cars, and we'll start first with new cars. This will provide up to $7,500 on eligible models that meet certain criteria, and we will cover that on the next slide. And it's valid from now until 2032 for battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and fuel cell electric vehicles. Now, this incentive, this tax credit can be claimed at both point of sale or when filing taxes, but the vehicle must be purchased from an IRS registered dealership, and we will cover that in a little bit. To be eligible for this credit, you must have an income of less than 300,000 for joint filers, 225,000 for heads of household, and 150,000 for individual filers. And you can see the link here at the bottom. You can click that and you'll find more information from the IRS website. We will be sharing the slides at the end of the presentation, and you'll have access to the full slide deck and can click all the different hyperlinks that we have throughout. So those vehicle requirements, there are three. The first is assembly location, and the final assembly place must be in North America, and you can check this by VIN. The second requirement is an MSRP price cap. So that's 80,000 for SUVs, vans, and pickup trucks, and 55,000 for sedans and hatchbacks. And then the third requirement is the battery requirement. Now, this does get a little bit complicated. So I recommend just clicking that link in the top left corner in white that says view cars here. That will show you every car that is currently eligible for this tax credit and how much they will receive. But I do want to emphasize, just because a car is listed there, does that mean that the specific model you're looking to buy is eligible? That is because supply chains are really complicated and complex, and sometimes the vehicle did not meet these standards. But the battery standards are for both the mineral component. If that is met, the car will receive $3,750, and then the battery component will receive an additional $3,750. If the vehicle meets both of these mineral and battery components, the car will receive $7,500. And if neither of these components are met, the car receives nothing. You can click the learn more here if you want to read more about what those mineral and battery components are. But ultimately, like I said, I really just recommend going to that list and seeing what cars are available. The next section under the federal program is the clean vehicle credit for used cars. Now, this there's a very long list of manufacturers and models, and you can click that list, but the battery requirements do not apply for the used vehicles, so many cars are available to receive this credit. Now, the credit is only for 4,000 or 30% of the sale price, whichever is lowest. And it must be purchased from an IRS registered dealership. But recently we learned about a new website called Key Savvy. This allows private individuals to sell and list their car on the Key Savvy website, which is registered as a dealership and works as a middleman. So it could be a potential option. We just wanted to plug that there, and you can click the link to go to their homepage. The vehicle does have to meet certain requirements. So it must be at least 2 years old, and it must cost less than $25,000. And it applies at the first resale only after August 16, 2022 for, again, only the second owner. And we did speak with the IRS recently, and they did confirm this. And this program has a lower income threshold. So to receive this vehicle credit, joint filers must make less than $150,000, and individual filers must make less than $75,000. So how to claim this credit? So we have created this list here. The consumer can choose to transfer this credit to either an IRS registered dealership at point of sale, or they can take that credit when filing taxes. The option to transfer to point of sale just started recently in January 2024. Unfortunately, their IRS has not released a database of all dealerships that are eligible, but the vehicle must be purchased from an IRS registered dealership. If you choose to transfer the tax credit at point of sale, you can either receive cash, like the money can be given to you. You can apply it towards the down payment if you're taking out a loan, or if you're paying with cash, you can apply that credit towards the total cost of the EV. Now, if it's taken at point of sale, the buyer can access the full rebate. So if the car is eligible for $7,500, you can receive that full $7,500 at point of sale, regardless of your own tax liability. And this is for both new and used battery electric and plug-in hybrids. If you choose to take this credit when filing your taxes, you can only receive up to your federal tax liability. So if you are looking to buy a car that receives that full $7,500, but for example, you only paid $4,000 in federal taxes, then you're only able to claim up to your own liability. Now, when you go to purchase from a dealership, we've created this checklist that I really want to stress you should read and you should definitely follow. We have had people call and say that they didn't do a step or two, and unfortunately, they were unable to get that credit. So first, you want to confirm that your expected income for the tax year is under those required limits that I spoke about before. Now, if you end up making more than that amount, you will have to repay the full tax credit. So just be sure and confirm that. Next, you want to make sure that the dealership or the store that you're working with has registered with the IRS, and they have to register online through the Energy Credits online portal. Now, you can find out if the dealership did this by talking to the general manager or a salesperson, but like I said, the IRS has not released a database yet. Next, you want to ask the salesperson that you're working with to confirm via that same energy credit online portal that the exact vehicle you're looking to buy does qualify for the federal tax credit. Like I said, a model may be listed on the EPA's website, but the specific car you're looking to buy could potentially not qualify. So you want to double check. Next, you want to, when you make that purchase, once that's been confirmed, you have to request a copy of two things. First, you want that time of sale report that the dealer submits. This will have information both about you as the buyer and the vehicle that you're looking to buy. And you want to get a copy of that confirmation that that time of sale report was successfully submitted, because you're going to need both of these things when it comes time to file taxes. You're going to have to file Form 8936, regardless of whether you take that credit at point of sale or not, and regardless of, and even if you don't normally file your taxes. If you want to read more, we do have a link to the IRS website on the bottom. And like I said, we'll share the slides at the end. Now, let's say there's a car you really want to buy and they are not eligible for that credit. Well, there's an important leasing loophole that I want to talk about. So when the Inflation Reduction Act was created, there was a section for commercial vehicle tax credits, and it did not have those same battery and mineral eligibility requirements that the clean vehicle credit has. So dealerships as a commercial entity can claim that commercial vehicle tax credit when they acquire the vehicle from the manufacturer or the bank to lease. Many are then choosing to pass these savings on, and you'll see a lot of different automakers such as BMW, Hyundai. I know Audi does it. They'll advertise a $7,500 lease rebate, and that is from this leasing loophole. So if you have your eye on a particular vehicle and it does not qualify for the clean vehicle credit, you should consider leasing. Now we're going to move on to the state programs. So we'll focus on Massachusetts because that is what the webinar is. Here in MA, we have the MOR-EV program, and under MOR-EV are several sub-programs, and we'll start first with MOR-EV Standard. This provides $3,500 for new battery electric vehicles, and that costs less than $55,000. This can be both for the purchase or a 36-month lease, and it can be purchased both in and outside of Massachusetts as long as you're a Massachusetts resident. It's really easy to apply. There are two options. You can either receive a rebate at a participating dealership when you choose to purchase or lease, and you can find the participating dealerships on the MOR-EV website, which we have linked here. Or option two, you can apply post-purchase for the rebate through the online application, and it's really simple. Now, the next program is MOR-EV Used. It provides $3,500 for used battery electric vehicles. And I want to stress, all of these MOR-EV programs are only for battery electric, not for plug-in hybrid or traditional hybrid. For MOR-EV Used, the final sales price must be less than $40,000. And unlike MOR-EV Standard, a MOR-EV Used vehicle must be purchased at a licensed Massachusetts dealership. The vehicle must not have gotten that MOR-EV rebate in the past 3 years as well. Now, this program has an income requirement. So you must either participate in a list of income qualified programs, and this is on the MOR-EV website. Examples include SNAP or Medicaid, or you must have a modified adjusted gross income under the limit, which is $150,000 if married, $112,500 if head of household, or $75,000 for single filers and everyone else. To apply, you can either go to an authorized point of sale at a participating dealership, but you must have pre-qualification from the MOR-EV website, or you can do post-purchase by applying online at morev.org. This next program is MOR-EV Plus, and it is an adder program, so it provides an additional rebate for low-income drivers. So $1,500 in addition to the other program if you're in an income qualified program. And like I said, that list is on the MOR-EV website. And this can be added to MOR-EV Standard, MOR-EV Used, or MOR-EV Truck, which we'll talk about. To apply, same way, either point of sale with pre-qualification or post-purchase online. And this last program, which is fairly new, is MOR-EV Truck. And this is for vehicles that meet the following requirements. They must either be a new electric or fuel cell pickup truck with a gross vehicle weight rating between 6,000 and 10,000 pounds, or a new electric or fuel cell vehicle of any body type with a gross vehicle weight rating between 8,501 and 10,000 pounds. And the vehicle must have a maximum MSRP of 80,000. Several different people and individuals are eligible for MOR-EV trucks: people who live and are residents in Massachusetts, private businesses, nonprofits, and educational institutions in Massachusetts, and local, municipal, and state governments and departments. Now, this program is really great because it provides $7,500. And here are some of the class 2, and here are some of the eligible vehicles. We have pictured in the back the Ford E-Transit. This is like a van. We have the Ford F-150 Lightning, which is pictured in the front, that blue truck. The Rivian R1T on the left, which is a truck, and the Rivian R1S, which is an SUV on the right, and not pictured because it's not yet available for sale, but the Chevy Silverado EV will also be eligible. Now, there's one more program. This is also an adder program. It's MOR-EV Trade-In, and this will provide an additional $1,000 for residents who qualify when trading in a qualifying internal combustion engine vehicle. So only a gas vehicle. This does not include hybrids or plug-in hybrids. And the vehicle must be traded in when purchasing or leasing at the same time. This program is compatible with MOR-EV Standard, MOR-EV Used, and MOR-EV Plus if you're eligible. But the vehicle must meet some trade-in eligibility requirements. So you have to provide an inspection report from MA Vehicle Check, and we have the link there. It must be an internal combustion engine vehicle. Like I said, no hybrids or plug-in hybrids that is at least 12 years old based on the model year. It has to have market value, and this would be demonstrated by having that value subtracted on that lease or purchase agreement from the dealership. So the dealership has to be paying you some sort of money for this trade-in. It must be traded into a Massachusetts dealership, and it must be registered within Massachusetts to either the applicant or the immediate family for at least 2 years prior to that trade-in date. And it has to have a gross vehicle weight rating of less than 8,500 pounds. And you can click there in the bottom right for more information from MOR-EV. Now, I know all of that can be a bit confusing or overwhelming, so we just have a quick summary chart here of all the MOR-EV rebate programs, and I'll run through it quickly. So MOR-EV Standard, which is on the top, or MOR-EV Used, which is on the bottom, will receive $3,500. If you're eligible for MOR-EV Plus, you can get $1,500. And if you have a vehicle that does qualify to trade in, you can get an additional $1,000 for a total possible rebate of $6,000. Now, MOR-EV Truck in the middle will receive a rebate of $7,500. And if you're eligible for MOR-EV Plus, an additional $1,500 for a total rebate of $9,000. Now we're going to see if there's any questions that we should go over.
I've been answering some questions in the chat. I'll just highlight one, which is somebody asked if your income is above the limit for the federal tax credit, can you still take advantage of the leasing loophole? And the answer to that is yes, because in that case, it's the commercial entity's tax liability that is relevant. not yours. So they take the tax credit and then they choose whether they're passing that on to you or not. So if your income is high enough that you don't qualify for the federal tax credit, looking at leasing is a good idea. I think those were most of the questions. For now, there's a couple other questions that have a little less to do with incentives. So I'll put a pin on those, move on to talk about incentives for charging, and then we can come back to questions at the end, but please do keep putting your questions into the chat while we go through this presentation. So I'm here to talk about incentives for charging, specifically charging at home. Again, we'll talk about incentives for commercial entities at another webinar, but today this is specifically for residential charging. So starting at the top, we'll start with the federal tax credit. So the Inflation Reduction Act, which set up the federal tax credit that Ezra just explained, also set up a federal tax credit for the installation of charging infrastructure at home. The amount is 30% of the cost, not to exceed $1,000, but this is a credit that is only available if the location of the installation meets specific requirements. And those requirements are that the location is either an urban area, sorry, not an urban area, a rural area, or a low income area. And when we send these slides out, you can see that we've hyperlinked to a resource where you can type in your address and determine whether you are in a location where you qualify for this federal tax credit or not. So again, up to 30% up to $1,000, but only in rural or low income areas. And there's a tool that we can send you a link for to determine whether you qualify. Moving right along, we'll talk about state incentives. Massachusetts actually has a fair number of incentives through a program called MOR-EV for installing charging in different locations. There's a bunch of incentives for installing charging at workplaces or for public chargers or at educational campuses. But in the realm of home charging, the relevant MOR-EV program is one that covers the costs in multi-unit dwellings, which are defined as homes with more than 5 units. So in those cases, MOR-EV can cover up to 60% of the hardware and installation costs of level 1 or level 2 charging stations. Those are the types of charging stations you would install at home. DC fast charging is another type of charging that is the super high powered stuff you'll see along highways and used for road trips. That does not qualify for this program, but level 1 and level 2 are what most people use to charge at home. And again, MOR-EV will cover up to 60% of that hardware and installation costs, and it's capped at $50,000 per location. So when we send out these slides, you can click on that link to see more. But again, this is relevant for multi-unit dwellings with 5 or more units. In Massachusetts, we have a sort of a messy map of different electric utilities in different parts of the state. So we'll cover broadly what's available from those utilities, and that'll be the bulk of this section because that's where the bulk of those incentives are. So the first thing to know is if you live in an area with a municipal light plant or an MLP, check your MLP's website. There's about 43 of these, I think, across the state, and some of them have really excellent electric vehicle incentive programs for the chargers or time of use rates or other incentives to help you make the switch. So if you are not a customer of National Grid, Eversource, or Unitil, that probably means you've got an MLP and you should go look at their website or give them a call to see what they can offer you for electric vehicle charging installation at home. Then Unitil is an investor-owned utility that covers, I think, about 4 communities in Massachusetts. Because that's a relatively small part of the population, we link to the website here. We don't go through those incentives in as much detail, but you should know that Unitil does have programs available to you to help you install charging at home. And then the bulk of today's presentation will be on National Grid and Eversource, which are the 2 big investor-owned utilities that cover most of Massachusetts residents. And they both have supportive programs to install charging with different requirements and different amounts in different segments. So that's what we're going to talk through today. One important concept that will be really crucial to understanding what you might qualify for is environmental justice. So the state of Massachusetts has a definition of an environmental justice community, which is a way for the state to determine which areas might have been historically burdened by pollution and therefore might require special attention moving forward to rectify those burdens or invest in new growth. So the environmental justice definition has three components. There's a component related to income. There's a component related to language isolation, meaning if a certain percentage of the community doesn't speak English as a first language. And then there's a third component, which in the state's lingo has to do with what percentage of the community is identified as a minority. And so a community can be an environmental justice community for meeting just one of those criteria, or two of them, or all three. We will link to this very important map so you can type in your address and figure out if you live in an area that is designated as an environmental justice community, and importantly, figure out which criteria your location meets, because the incentives, as we'll go over in the coming slides, depend on whether you are an environmental justice community at all, and if you are, whether the location, meets the income criteria, the language criteria, or the minority criteria. So this is a website online where you can plug in your address. It will become very useful, but for now, just remember, environmental justice has a definition, and you can figure out if your location meets it or not. So jumping right into things. We're going to talk about residential incentives to install charging for single-family homes, 2 to 4 unit homes, and then 5+ unit homes. But we're starting with single-family homes. If you live in an area that is not an environmental justice community and you are not on the low income electricity rate, you get up to $700 for home wiring upgrades. So if you need an electrician to come in and lay a new 240 volt line so that you can install a charging station inside or outside near where you park, you get a $700 from National Grid or Eversource, but no rebate for the purchase of the charger itself. If you are in an environmental justice community, regardless of your personal income or how you identify, just if the building where the charger is being installed is located in an environmental justice community, those home wiring upgrades go up to $1,000, but again, there's no rebate for the actual charger hardware. And then if you are on the low income rate, which means on your electric bill, if you are paying a lower amount per kilowatt hour, you would see R2 as the sort of code for that low income rate on your bill. Then you get up to $1,000 for home wiring upgrades and $700 for the purchase of the charger. For all of these programs, to get that incentive from the electric utility, you must enroll in any available managed charging program, which in National Grid's case is an off-peak charging rebate, where you save a little bit of money per kilowatt hour if you charge your vehicle off-peak, which mostly means overnight. And Eversource currently doesn't have a managed charging program, but they'll be proposing one later this year. So I know this is already confusing, and it's only going to get more confusing from here. But the key things to remember are your location matters, your personal income does not, just the location of the property. And then the incentives are broken up into one bucket for home wiring upgrades. So an electrician coming in and laying a new line so that you can install a charger. And then rebates for the purchase of the charger hardware itself. So those are those two buckets. I'll pause actually because I see a question coming in, and I know this is complicated enough that maybe it's useful to respond in real time. But okay, it looks like all those questions were answered, so I'll just keep going. So moving up to 2 to 4 unit homes. I know a lot of people live in triple deckers. I live in a triple decker, and the incentives in those homes are slightly different from the single family homes. I'm going to start again at the bottom of the chart and kind of move up. So if you live in a home that has 2 to 4 units, you're not on the low income rate, and you do not live in an environmental justice community, you can qualify for $1,400 for home wiring upgrades. And again, there's no rebate for the purchase of the charger. Here, of course, it gets a little bit complicated. Are we talking about an apartment? Or are we talking about a condo? In the case of an apartment, it's the landlord that would qualify for that $1,400. In the case of a condo, you should definitely call National Grid or Eversource because they've got some more complicated rules about assigned parking and all that. But note that the incentive itself is basically doubled from single family homes in recognition of the fact that if you've got a 2 to 4 unit home, maybe you're installing a couple more chargers and the costs will go up. So you might need more to cover the costs of that wiring upgrade. If you are not on the low income rate, but you do live in an environmental justice community, the home wiring upgrades are $2,000. And again, there's no rebate for the purchase of the charger. And if you are on the low income rate, your home wiring upgrades are $2,000. And then there's a $700 rebate for the purchase of the charger. And again, for all of these, to qualify, you must enroll in any available managed charging program with the utility. I'll pause real quick because I see a question, but I think I'll leave that question for later because it's more about how we got here and less about the incentives. And I want to make sure we get through the explanation of the incentives before we talk about bigger questions. So again, this was 2 to 4 unit homes. Now we'll move on to 5+ units, and this is where it gets particularly complicated. So for National Grid and Eversource, if you are a 5+ unit home, they don't really think of you as a residential location. They think of that as a commercial account because the building owner or the landlord has a commercial account for any building that has that many units. And therefore, the incentive structure is a little bit different. So for the home wiring upgrades, again, 100% of those are covered, both on the utility side, so anything that the utility needs to upgrade itself between the distribution system, so the poles and wires on the street, up to the meter in the home, and also on the other side, so anything that the customer side needs to do from the meter to the charging station pad. Those are capped at an average cost. But in theory, and in most cases, it's 100% covered on the wiring upgrades. For the purchase of the charger itself, the amount of support you will get from the utility depends on which of the criteria for the environmental justice community that location meets. So if you live in an environment, or if the building is in an environmental justice community that meets the income requirement of the state definition, 100% of the costs of the charger are covered. If you live in an environmental justice community that meets one of the other 2 requirements, so either the language isolation or the percent of the community that's considered a minority, then 75% of the charger is covered. And if you do not live, or if the location is not in an environmental justice community at all, then 50% of the charger is covered. Again, this is really complicated. We'll send out these slides and another page that explains all of this. But again, you can use that link to figure out whether any particular location is in an environmental justice community. And then you can use this table to figure out how much you would be covered for. In all of these cases, if you choose to install a networked charger, so this is a charger that can communicate either via Wi-Fi or cell service, you are eligible for a $480 networking rebate, which is basically a rebate from the utility to cover the costs that you'll have to pay to basically run the software that will allow you to see in real time who's charging or assign prices. If you want to charge tenants, or if the landlord wants to charge tenants, the cost of the electricity, that kind of stuff is facilitated by network chargers. And so that fee that you might have to pay is covered by this $480. And then, very crucially, you cannot stack incentives from National Grid and Eversource with incentives from the state, like the MOR-EV program that I mentioned earlier. So you can't have the utility incentives on one hand and MOR-EV on the other. You have to do one or the other. So I know that was a lot. I will just flag that there is even more money coming down the pike, so to speak, to get at this issue of how do we make sure that there's charging infrastructure available to everyone, even and especially people who don't live in single family homes where it's the easiest to do the install. Massachusetts has a quasi-state agency called the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. They're really excellent. If you haven't heard of them, they do lots of work on the clean energy front, but they are getting a whole lot of funding this year to pilot potential solutions for lots of different use cases. So they're getting funding to pilot curbside charging. How do we install chargers on the right of way? So if you don't have off-street parking, you can still park on the street and charge a car overnight, for example. They're going to dedicate some funds to charging specifically for gig drivers, so folks who drive for Uber or Lyft or Grubhub or any of those, and taxi drivers as well, because we know those drivers drive a disproportionate number of miles and also are more likely to live in places where there isn't easy access to charging. There's a lot of funding coming for something called vehicle to grid or vehicle to X, which is basically how can we facilitate using the batteries in electric vehicles as basically grid resources. So on days where we're using a lot of electricity, how can we discharge some of the electricity from vehicles that are stationary back onto the grid so that we don't have to turn on another power plant, for example. They also want to look at solutions for medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets that right now there isn't the infrastructure yet to support those fleets. What can we do in the short term to provide access to those fleets with mobile charging while we build out the actual infrastructure? And then there's a whole bunch of other cool pilots that they will be funding too. So we link to a press release here. This is mostly just if you're curious, there's a lot of cool work that's being done to try and address this issue of charging infrastructure access. We are already at the end of our presentation, so I'll do our last couple of slides and then we can turn to some questions in the chat. It is Earth Month. Earth Day is next week, so we've got lots of events. This week, tomorrow at noon, we've got a webinar that's all about charging. So if you are curious about what is level 2 charging versus DC fast charging, and how do I maximize my battery, and how do I install all this charging at home, we're going over the details tomorrow at noon. And then if you're interested in building electrification and heat pumps, we've got a Heat Pumps 101 on Thursday, and lots more events coming later in the year. I would be remiss if I did not share this slide to say that we are a nonprofit organization. And if you are willing and able and so moved, we would welcome any donation you can make so that we can keep putting on webinars like this for free to make sure more people understand the incentives and the technologies that are out there available to them. And the link for that is greenenergyconsumers.org/donate. And then lastly, if you enjoyed this and want to learn more, we have a bunch of different ways that you can engage with us. So we've got a Drive Green community Facebook page where people can post and ask questions, and EV drivers will chime in and share their experience, or we share articles that are interesting, and it's just a good place to learn. You can follow us on Instagram and also Twitter and Facebook. We've got a quarterly newsletter where we write up all the recent developments in the markets and anything cool that we've read or changes to incentives. And then if you don't already have an EV, but maybe aren't in the market right now, you can sign our pledge that your next car will be electric, and we'll just keep you up to date with any market or policy developments that might inform your decision on your next car. So with that, I'll stop sharing and look at some of these questions. I don't know, Ezra, are there any that we should start with?
I think we should start with the unanswered one because I wasn't sure of the answer, so I didn't type anything. But if you want to take that.
So the question is about the environmental justice definition, and it's specifically, did environmental justice groups participate in the determination of the specified benefits, or were they set by the federal government and or state? So that is a very good question, and I will give an attempt at a short answer, and I can dive into more detail if you're interested. So the first thing to note is that there are lots of different definitions of environmental justice or disadvantaged communities. So the state has an environmental justice definition that was set in legislation. And there are lots of environmental justice groups that have been advocating for a very long time to have a statewide definition. And the fact that we have one is a victory that took probably decades of work. There are also federal definitions for a lot of the benefits. So you'll hear Justice 40 a lot right now. That is part of the Inflation Reduction Act or the Biden administration's approach to climate investments, that at least 40% of them have to go to disadvantaged communities. And that is a different federal definition that has been set in lots of different ways. So in terms of the first layer of the question is like, did the definitions get set with environmental justice groups? On the state level, definitely. Federal level, it's very complicated and I know less about it. Then in terms of did EJ groups participate in building these benefits? I will go through a couple. So the federal tax credit, I can't speak to. That's the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of stuff going on at the federal level that I can't speak to as well. On the state level, I don't know about the Massachusetts EVIP program. That's the state rebate program that I talked to about 5+ unit buildings. But I can speak to the utility incentives. So the utility incentives got set through a process governed or overseen by the Department of Public Utilities. And that is one of the least accessible state processes that I have witnessed. So the utilities, because they are what's called a natural monopoly, are regulated by the Department of Public Utilities. And when the utilities want to do something, they have to make a proposal, and it goes through this very long process at the DPU before it gets approved. So the programs that are in place now got proposed in 2021. The utilities, National Grid, Eversource, and Unitil basically said to the DPU, this is what we want to do for EVs for the next 5 years. What do you think? And then that process is called a docket, and only entities that are approved as interveners get a say, basically, and are allowed to comment or submit questions or submit testimony in that process. And Green Energy Consumers was one of those groups. And there were a couple others, and some of those were environmental justice groups, but the process has a lot of barriers to entry because you need a lawyer to represent you. You need to be able to go through lots and lots of technical documents. There were one or two sort of public hearing sessions where people could come and speak, but generally this is a very bureaucratic and confusing process, so it is not easily accessible. I will say that the utilities did reach out to lots of stakeholders in advance. We definitely talked to them and told them what we thought should be in those proposals, and they listened on some of it and not on some other pieces. I don't know what other groups they reached out to. And I can say that I know that Green Roots, which is an organization based in Chelsea, an environmental justice organization, they submitted testimony via the Conservation Law Foundation, and the Public Health Institute of Massachusetts, the Public Health Association of Massachusetts submitted testimony as one of our guest experts in that process. So those voices were both talking about the importance of electrifying heavy duty vehicles in particular, because diesel emissions are so bad for public health, but they didn't weigh in on environmental justice communities' levels of incentives for charging. So that was maybe a more long-winded answer than you wanted, but the process for those utility incentives in particular is very convoluted. And I think most environmental justice groups that we engage with on our public policy advocacy focus more on legislation and other state agencies like the Department of Energy Resources, the Department of Environmental Protection, and less on these really technical, wonky utility processes.
Another question just came in also. The battery requirements are very complicated, and I do not feel comfortable relying on the dealer recommendation for its as to its application to a particular vehicle, can I verify through the VIN number or a website? Do you want to answer that or should I?
Go for it. Go for it.
So unfortunately, no. We really try to find a way to bypass having to rely on the dealership, but through the current setup, especially with the energy credit portal online, the only way specifically to verify the exact vehicle you're looking to buy is through that IRS online portal, and the only people who have access to that are the dealerships. So you do have to confirm with the dealership. You can trust that they'll do it if you request that submission, like we said in the slide, because that submission will show it has been submitted. But no, there is no website where you can verify the VIN number that by the VIN number that the car is eligible. You can verify where it's been assembled, but you cannot verify the battery, mineral, and component requirements. So you do have to go through the dealership. But that's also how the credit is applied if you do point of sale. So you can confirm if the dealership actually did this work or not. But yes.
And I will say, I will add to that, we know that this is very frustrating. We share that frustration, both that you can't check the vehicle yourself and that there's no easy way to see what dealers are registered and which dealers aren't. And we have a new friend at the IRS, and we have passed those feelings on. So they're being elevated to the extent that they can get elevated. And I know that other groups across the country and also nationally are making this point as well, that this is not the most consumer-friendly process. So I have my fingers crossed that something will change, but for right now, what Ezra said is absolutely correct, that you have to go through the dealer.
All right, so those were all of the open questions. There were a few I answered. Just to reiterate, there is no income limit for MOR-EV standard. There is an income limit for MOR-EV used and MOR-EV plus. This question, I don't know if you want to talk about more, but the question is, how are vehicle inspections done on EVs? I just answered, to my knowledge, in Massachusetts, EVs are exempt from emission inspections, but they still have to the vehicle still has to be inspected for like working headlights and horns.
That's my understanding as well.
Okay. And then that's it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us on a otherwise very beautiful Tuesday evening. If you have any more questions, we'll hang out for another 10 seconds to see if any pop up. But otherwise, look out for an email from us tomorrow or later this week with a recording, the slides, and some of the key links that we talked about. But otherwise, you'll see those in the slides. And we hope you learned something and enjoyed this presentation. Okay, I see those numbers dropping, so I think we'll call it. Have a lovely evening, everybody.
Good night.